we had before the pandemic was in this room. And then we, of course, had to all go home. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve Lommel to kick us off. Hopefully Steve is there. He is.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, everybody, for attending today at the State View Hotel. And welcome to NC State University and the College of Ag and Life Sciences for this emerging research showcase on Farm of the Future. My name is Steve Lommel. I'm the Associate Dean for Research, and we are pleased that we have so many folks here in person and also an international audience online. The Emerging Research Showcase events were developed as a way to introduce our external stakeholders to new research projects that could benefit from external collaborations. Based on the number of attendees here today, the subject of precision ag for crop and animal production is important to the ecosystem. Let me just go through a couple of slides to show you that we are also at the university in the public sector thinking about the farm of the future and creating platform for the farm of the future for the PSI and for a number of other activities that we're doing on campus. Advance the slide, please. So just let me give you a little bit of perspective about our farm of the future. We kind of are a farmer for the entire state here at the university. This is a specialty crop state. There are over 90 different commodity groups in the state, organized commodity groups. The large bulk of these are plant-based commodity groups, although we have some important animal agriculture commodity groups as well. When you look at the $95+ billion ag economy of the state, about a little over 2/3 of that is derived from food animals. The other third is derived from plants, of which there's probably 75 commodity groups. So next slide, please. To service all these different commodities and agriculture in the state, we have a historic network of 18 research stations spread throughout the state, as well as a number of field laboratories, which are mostly consolidated near the campus, but not all of them. We grow those 90 different plus commodity groups on these 18 different research stations. We grow these because we have different soil types, different climatic conditions that are conducive for different types of agriculture. We're very proud of this system. We run this system in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture. But in many ways, these are traditional sites. We need to have these sites brought up to the 21st century. And so we are, next slide, please. So we have identified 5 stations, 5 sites in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture that we are going to focus additional and major investment into to be able to call them farm of the future. We are investing a lot of fiber to the station, as well as different types of Wi-Fi signals around the station, so we can sensor rich below and above ground experiments and be able to get that data maybe partially processed on site and then transmitted to the fiber and off to the cloud or back to the university. We're creating these test beds so we can work on robotics, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, use unmanned aerial vehicles, and as well as satellite systems, precision agriculture, all of these things in an integrated farm system with a lot of other, say, biological technologies. So we're making a major investment in these sites. We have are also upgrading other aspects of these 5 research stations with next generation irrigation and these type of things. One of the stations in particular we have a major advancement on, and that's our Lake Wheeler Road Field Lab, which is adjacent to campus. We received this was really driven out of the engineering college, a $25 million grant from the National Science Foundation for a project called AERPAW, AERPIW, which stands for Aerial Experimentation and Research Platforms. This is a wireless test bed that's going to be all around Raleigh. AirPaw is not only for agricultural purposes, but we have some sites for AirPaw on the Lake Wheeler site that can integrate into the system. And we're very excited about this technology and this platform. So I'll just close in saying that you're all very familiar, I hope, and have heard of the Plant Sciences Initiative, which is a physical building as well as a culture to do interdisciplinary research, interact with engineers and any type of disciplinary scientists that you need to do big science. A lot of the discoveries and experiments that will emerge out of the Plant Sciences Initiative will need to be test bedded at controlled sites, controlled farm sites before they deployed out at the field and landscape and global scale. And that's why we have the building coming online. We have a USDA building coming online that's a translational building, and then we have these Farm of the Future sites. So with that, I'll sort of stop and just let you know that as you folks today talk about a lot of different aspects of Farm of the Future, I think we are prepared to be excellent partners with these platforms and the technology that we're working with and the faculty we have and the 90 different commodity groups and these research stations spread throughout the state. So what I'll do now is I'll transition and I'll introduce Adrian Percy. He's our new Executive Director of the Plant Sciences Initiative. He just started, I think he said 10 days ago. So he's still a little bit getting familiar with the ways of the university and the ways of academia. And we're very excited to have Adrian as our new director. And as I've been saying lately, we have a great leadership for the team for the PSI. We have 4 fantastic, collaborative, imaginative scientists who are very rigorous. Those are the 4 platform directors who come from what I would call traditional academic backgrounds. And then we have Adrian, who's come in from the industry side. And I think we are in the process of marrying the best aspects of what I would call academic style research and science with corporate science, leadership, and management. And I feel that we really have a fantastic team with a broad perspective and broad history. On that, I'll turn it over to Adrian.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for that introduction and those kind words. And hello, everybody. I mean, first of all, I have to say I regret not being able to be with you there in person. I will certainly be at the next one of these events, but I'd actually accepted another speaking engagement, so I'm talking to you from across a different part of the state. But it's at least very great opportunity for me to talk for a few minutes about the Plant Science Initiative. And as Steve said, I've joined very recently. I'm now into double digits in terms of my time with NC State, 10 days on the job. It's been a wonderful first week and a half. I've been exposed to many things. Many new faculty have been describing, the kind of work that they're doing, both will be doing in the new plant science building, but also that they're already working on. It's been a real voyage of discovery. For me, what is so compelling and exciting about the Plant Science Initiative is the way that we're going to work together to make this a reality. As Steve said, we will be working in an interdisciplinary manner, and at least through my career, I've seen this as a tremendous pathway to finding really new innovation and to revealing kind of new research areas, by working between different disciplines. And that's certainly how, we've started. We've identified a number of different groups that will go into the plant science building when it's completed. And they are very interdisciplinary in nature, particularly if you look at the interactions between, the plant scientists and other scientists in the CALS Institute with the College of Engineering, particularly. There's going to be a lot of crossover there, which I think will lead to some really important discoveries. As you said, Steve, the Plant Science Initiative is much bigger than the building itself. It's a fantastic building. And for those of you who are at the State View Hotel, if you have an opportunity to drive by and through Centennial Campus on your way out of here, you can see just how far we've progressed. The building itself is coming in at a cost of around $160 million. So a huge amount of money has been raised from donations from commodity groups, from the state of North Carolina, which has been incredibly supportive, from other donors, notably in areas of high interest for agriculture. So this has been a wonderful coming together of a lot of different people. There is around 185,000 square foot of space in this building, so it's a huge amount of space. There will be a mixture of open laboratories, office spaces. There is a maker space, which is basically a prototyping laboratory. There is a think tank, which will be for our data science colleagues to really work on data-driven projects, and also a partner space, which is very unusual in a university setting. And that's one of the things I'm particularly excited about, that we will bring in partners from other corporations, be they big or perhaps small companies, to work alongside our scientists and to hopefully find commercial outlets in some cases for our science at NC State. The initiatives is also about people, and Steve mentioned the platform directors I'm very privileged to work with. I know a couple of them, at least one of them is going to be with you this afternoon, explaining what they're doing, but also an awful lot of faculty who are going to go into the building over time. And you know, as you said, Steve, we're going to be working not just within this building, but across campus and also beyond, and really leveraging the wonderful research network that we have within North Carolina. So we're very confident of an opening in March next year, with an official building ceremony on the 12th of April. That's what we're working towards. At that point, we would have finished, obviously, construction. We will have a number of groups in the building, and we're already making plans to actually move those folks so that they have as little interruption into their ongoing research programs as possible, and they will get started, you know, prior to that building dedication on April 12th. One of the very exciting things I also wanted to mention is that already we have close to $100 million of grant money that has come in associated with this initiative. That's a huge number, especially when you consider the building isn't even ready yet. And some of those projects will be, I'm sure, highlighted today, but some really important projects around topics such as recycling environmental phosphorus and finding ways to lighten the need that plants have to use phosphorus as a nutrient, which is obviously, there are finite amounts of this in the environment to mine, and these types of projects, which I think will bring, you know, real solutions to growers, but also positive impact on the environment as well. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I'm happy to answer any questions if we have time for that, but if not, I'm going to hand over to Dina, I think.
Are there any questions for Adrian before? Are there any questions for Adrian? All right, great. I'm standing in today for Dinah Schuster. My name is Erin Meyer. I'm the Director of Development for the Plant Sciences Initiative, and along with Dinah Schuster, who's the Senior Director of Development for the Plant Sciences Initiative, also works with the Research Foundation Board, the in-house Research Foundation Board. This is a board of industry leaders, farmers and producers, and scientists that advise Steve Lommel and the research office. And many of them are here and online today. And this Emerging Research Showcase is a brainchild of the Research Foundation Board. They were really interested in hearing more about the research that's being done at the college and in the university. So we just came off of a very successful board meeting today where we heard student research presentations, and then this afternoon we're hearing faculty research presentations. Dinah and I work with a lot of corporate partners, many that are represented here and online today. And many of them not only sponsor research, but they also complement their investment with gifts. And those are gifts to fund graduate students or support faculty research or programs. CERSA, the Center for Excellence in Regulatory Science in Agriculture, is one example that we're talking to folks about most recently. So as you listen today, I encourage you to think holistically about your support and how you might maximize the impact on your objectives. So if you aren't already working with us, please reach out via email to either Dinah or I. And we'd love to talk to you about some of those opportunities that exist.
Thanks to, whoa, that's louder than I thought. Thanks to Steve Lommel. Thanks for Adrian, Percy for joining us remotely. Thanks to all of you for joining us in person and remotely. From actually, we've got people attending from around the world. I would like to take this moment to introduce, I should introduce myself, right? My name is Deborah Thompson, and my role for the College of Ag and Life Sciences is probably the flip side of the coin from Erin and Dinah's. My job is research partnership development with industry. So my goal is to do exactly what we're going to do today, which is to put our faculty, who are amazing, in the same room or virtual room as the case may be, with industry scientists like yourselves, always with a goal of developing a research collaboration through sponsored research. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. This is our first hybrid showcase event. We plan to make all our mistakes on you. So please be kind and stick with us. But it's my pleasure to introduce my former coworker, Dr. Natalie Hummel. Natalie left us for the greener pastures of industry and is now Global Head of New Ag Technologies at UPL Limited. While she was a member of the research office in CALS, Natalie made huge steps forward on what she called the Future Ready Farm. And we're glad to welcome her back to campus to moderate a panel discussion titled Building the Future Ready Farm, New Collaboration Models Propel Innovation. Natalie, the floor is yours.
It is really nice to be back here again. I definitely left with a lot of great feelings towards Cal, so I'm happy that I can still join in some of these family events with the College of Ag. I really was just, I've had a kind of a back and forth career. So professor, administration, industry, back to administration, and I'm really kind of an industry person, but I love the opportunities for this integration. So I'm happy that we can still have these collaborations going on, because this is really where the breakthroughs come to be, I think. So today we are going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because it is something that I was able to start while I was working with David and the whole team at CALS related to the research stations and what we could do to modernize them. So I was happy to see Lommel talk about those points. And I'm just coming off of a 3-week trip through Europe. And so when I'm thinking about digital agriculture now more and more, I'm also thinking about all the different topics related to carbon sequestration. How are we going to truly achieve sustainability around the world? And coincidentally, when I was over there in Europe, COP was happening in Scotland. And that was really interesting to see. And I don't know how many of the things were connected and how many things are just kind of confluences in our world. But even when I was riding the trains in England, I was noticing these signs, encouraging people to switch out meat for beans in their kidney pie and things like that, to do things about your carbon footprint. And even when I came home, I was thinking that here I was in my garden, harvesting lettuce out of the ground, which hopefully did a little bit to offset the carbon footprint of flying to Europe and taking all these trips around. But the things that are going to enable these solutions to come forward, we all want to do something about the carbon footprint, for instance, and these other grand challenges that I know CALS faculty are working hard on with industry collaborations. But you really can't change what you can't measure. And I think right now we're all trying to chase this idea about what we can do to reduce carbon, for instance, around the world and sequester it. First off, we need to resolve on how to measure it. And these digital tools that we'll be talking about today, and the analytics and the minds that get applied to doing this, is how we can actually make these things happen, which I truly more and more, especially during the pandemic and all this time for self-reflection that I think we all had. This is a great opportunity for agriculture to really have a positive impact on the world, which is direly needed really by all of humanity at the moment. And working now in an Indian company that's based with a lot of people in developing countries, we are aware of the climate situation happening here, but people in other parts of the world are not sheltered in any way. from what's actually happening in the world. So to me, that also motivates even more urgency for our work. So on that note, I'm going to introduce the panelists and ask them to come up here. I think this is what Deborah has in mind. And I believe we also have a panelist online, because we have brought together some great minds here to talk about the work that they're doing right now on this subject. And then what we'd like to do is open up a dialogue here and hope that it will result, you have ideas that will come into your mind. And the opportunity with these showcases is to build the bridges and those connections. We're not going to solve the problems today, but we're going to put a lot of opportunities out there. And I hope also inspire some industry and academic collaboration, and also some students to see the urgent need, that we have for you to come into agriculture and help us solve these problems right now and for the future. So the first person I'll welcome up is Dr. Cranos Williams. So if you want to come on up, Cranos, the price is right. Cranos is the Goodnight Distinguished Professor of Agricultural Analytics at NC State University, with the primary and secondary appointments in the electrical and computer engineering and plant and microbial biology departments, respectively. And I'll just say quickly, I was saying to Cranos, and this is not meant to be flattery, genuinely, when I first started working with him at CALS, which was cool working with him coming from engineering, he has a great mind for thinking about these complex problems. And I think that really breakthroughs in agriculture come from people coming from the outside, who are not stuck, with, well, that won't work, kind of mentality that many of us who've been in agriculture season after season, you just can become a little constrained in your thinking. So I think I know some of the work he's working on is really looking at things differently, and including things like the social element of what holds us back, from doing things. So Dr. Williams also serves as the platform director of the data-driven plant sciences research platform of the Plant Sciences Initiative, which Adrian and Dr. Lommel were both talking about. He received, and he is also the head of the EnBiSys Research Laboratory. He received his BS in electrical engineering from NC State University in 2001, and his MS and PhD in electrical engineering from NC State University in 2002 and 2008, respectively. Dr. Williams has developed a highly collaborative multidisciplinary research program focused on understanding biomolecular pathways associated with plant growth, development, and adaptation. His research lab develops methodologies familiar to other areas of electrical and computer engineering to model and predict the impact that genetic and environmental perturbations have on overall plant response. The results from these works will have direct implications on key challenges associated with engineering plants for efficient biofuel production, increased adaptability to changing environments, and improved defense to biotic and abiotic stress. And like I said, he does a remarkable job of bringing together these multidisciplinary teams. So I enjoyed that when we were working together here. Next up is Mr. Hake. If you'd like to come on up, Cater. Cater's joining us as the Vice President of Agricultural and Environmental Research at Cotton Incorporated. We did have a chance to meet there when I was working at Bayer, when we toured the facility. If you haven't had a chance to go to the Cotton Incorporated research site, I do recommend it. It's right here in the area, and it's a lot of great work going on there. Cater leads a team of 7 research directors who develop and support innovative problem-solving research with a network of 300 public sector scientists to increase the profitability and sustainability of cotton farming in the US. I think I'm halfway wearing cotton today, so partly there. Cater came to Cotton Incorporated from a long career in cotton research and management, and most recently he was the Vice President of Technology Development at Delta and Pineland Company. And he's also held positions at Texas A&M University, the National Cotton Council, and the University of California. Go Aggies. He holds 3 degrees from the University of California at Davis and at Riverside, and was recently elected a fellow of AAAS for his technology transfer and promotion of science and agriculture. I did not actually realize we were both Aggies there, so that's a nice connection to have there, Katie. And Brent, is Brent here yet? Have you arrived? Okay, great. Brent, I know you were running a bit late maybe. So Brent is joining us also. He is a graduate also from NC State, so we have a couple of Wolfpacks here with a PhD in animal nutrition. He worked for Christensen Farms, which is a large integrated pork producer here in North Carolina for 17 years in various different roles, including bringing innovation and technology to pig production. He's currently employed by Cargill, leading research and innovation for North American pork. And online here, we have Ranveer Chandra. Ranveer is the CTO of Agri-Food, Managing Director of Research for Industry, and Head of Networking Research at Microsoft. Ranveer's research has shipped in multiple Microsoft products, including Xbox, Azure, Windows, and Visual Studio. He started the FarmBeats project in 2015, which shipped as a Microsoft product in 2019. And Bill Gates featured his work on FarmBeats on Gates Notes, and he has been invited to present to the Secretary of Agriculture and on TV White Spaces to the FCC chairman. Ranveer has published over 90 research papers and has over 100 patents granted by the US Patent Office. He is an IEEE fellow and has won several awards, including Best Paper Awards in Computer Science Conferences and the MIT Technology Review's Top Innovators Under 35 Award in 2010. I think that's well-deserved, Ranveer, based on your many accomplishments here. Ranveer has an undergraduate degree in IIT from Kharagpur, India, and a PhD in computer science from Cornell University. A lot of rival schools being represented here. This is fun. Davis, Cornell, this is exciting. So as I mentioned, with the help of the panelists here, we're going to talk through a few topics, but I'd also like you to be thinking about these topics and thinking how you can help if you have ideas to help tackle some of these big problems for us. And yep, okay, and through the Q&A. Okay, yeah, through the Q&A box for those of you online. So I think we have, do we have about an hour now then? Or a half an hour left? We've got an hour, yeah, okay, good. So I have basically 5 questions to lead the discussion here. Some of them I'll direct to a particular panelist. Some are going to be more open. And I've encouraged the panelists to actually, I think it's a more interesting conversation if sometimes we might not quite agree with each other. Most of these things are not black and white. So of course, respectfully though, I've given them the floor to raise a counterpoint, you know, if you're not agreeing with somebody's solution, but I think that can make the solutions more interesting in the end. And so what we'll start with, and then we'll bounce them around into the group. So the first question I'd like to direct to Cater, and this is related to the fact that growers have many options presented to them in the digital arena now, related to decision supportive problems related to growing a crop. What is adoption looking like at the moment by growers of these solutions? And how can industry and university collaborations enable increases in grower adoption of these tools?
Natalie, it's a wonderful question. I spend my summers driving around and visiting with growers about their non-adoption and adoption. And so it's really fun to see. Obviously, anything that solves an immediate problem gets adopted right away. And then some of those have wonderful spin-offs. The great examples are wind erosion. A lot of growers have adopted some sort of cover to protect their crops from the erosion factors of wind, and much of the no-till was adopted to protect soil from water erosion. And then these have led to all the other ancillary benefits that we know about. But the immediate need, such as drainage to be able to plant through a low spot in the field, or irrigation to plant a high-value crop, you know, that's often the driver for adoption. Then they see all the other benefits, such as setting herbicides or being able to manage nutrients. But there is a side that makes it a lot more difficult than addressing just those immediate concerns, and that has to do with farming is really a highly finely tuned orchestra. You've got really specific soils and equipment and expertise and history and markets. And so these are optimized maybe over a couple generations. And so making a radical change, such as going to no-till, is something that's really difficult for growers. So I'd like to comment on leave you with 3, and then we'll let the other panelists talk. 3 things that help adoption. And the first one is to put an easy button on it. And, you know, just having that big button that says easy. And the best example we like to use is AutoSteer. AutoSteer, when it came out, and that's basically self-guiding for tractors. As you can imagine, farmers are driving tractors down a row, and you have to keep it straight, but just simple equipment so they can take their hands off and check an email or doing something like that is just really, really fast. And we do have wonderful examples of that. And that's driven by the fact that you think about the easy button in a big picture, farmers have a lot to do. They've got markets, they've got to grow the crop, manage labor, and think about the banks and insurance and farm programs. So I think another approach that's really good is to work with the grower leaders, because those are the ones that are willing to recognize that there is a real opportunity there. And, we have at least within the cotton industry, we probably have 500 growers that donate their time for innovation and leadership in the community. And those are just wonderful. And the other growers look to them. The other growers the laggards, so to speak, if I can use that, those slow adopters, they may need some financial incentive to get them over that hump. But the third thing I can recommend is really the focus of what you're doing here is we have to recognize that 99+% of the things that growers use on the farm come from industry. And they don't come directly from academia.
Mhm.
And so academia needs to work closely with industry to make sure that that supply chain, that pipeline, that is not only prepared and situated and structured, but also incentivized to bring those innovations. So that's a really important 3 things I'll leave you with.
Thanks, Gator.
Who wants to
Does
comment
anybody
on
else
that?
want to comment on that question?
I think those are all great points, and I wrote those down, so thank you. The other thing that I'd add to those 3 are reliability. So 1, ease. 2, that it's consistently going to work 80% or more of the time. There's not a lot of downtime associated with it. I would say on a livestock space that cost is probably one of those things that's a additional component, because that has to be in every barn in many cases, rather than a piece of equipment that can be moved to crop. So I think definitely those are some great key points. I think that's probably what's stopping some of the things that from the livestock industry from being adopted. At the same time, I don't think we can allow costs to prevent innovation, right? Things get cheaper over time, technology. We can't stop that from innovating. So we've got to keep pushing. We've got to keep investing in those at the same time as work on those solutions.
Sure. I think that a lot of the comments that have already been made are excellent points. I think 2 of the things that really come to mind, particularly for me, is the ability to identify and integrate stakeholder value early in the process of technology development.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really seeing this particularly on the academic side, when you start to see and develop emerging technologies, whether it's sensors, whether it's data management tools, whether it's analytics, really starting to look at developing and designing these that are reflective of the values that the stakeholder has. And I think that oftentimes we look at this from more of developing a nice tool as opposed to a useful tool. So really conditioning how we see these tools as being engineered and developed over time is going to be extremely important. I also think that a key aspect is the awareness of useful technologies. Even as an engineer, you can get bombarded with terminology and various aspects of the next new database or the next new computing device or the next new computer. And you can imagine how hard it can be to really keep up with these changing dynamics of the technologies. I think making it easier for stakeholders to really understand the utility and potential value of emerging technologies is key. Thus, putting in place the various mechanisms, whether it's education, whether it's pamphlets, whether it's other aspects that really helps to transfer that knowledge, I think is also very important.
Great points, Cranos. I've been thinking a lot about how I'm going to go to you in a second, Ranveer. I guess I've been thinking a lot about how we could apply agile design principles into agriculture. And we would actually then bring the customer in on the front end. A lot of times we don't do that in industry because we're worried about confidentiality, IP, different valid reasons. But I've been thinking a lot about that, how we could accelerate designs by applying some of those principles. So I might follow you up with you on that later to learn from you in the software space. So Ranveer, did you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit. I agree with all the points that were said. The one thing I wanted to add was emphasizing one point that was raised was on what is the ROI for the grower? What's the return of investment for the grower for investing in any of these digital technologies? And we should be aware of that. We should model it and provide tools to the farmer to make sense of the ROI as well. One of the things we are working on is a what if analysis tool. So enabling a grower to try out different tools and see what is the impact of that. Like if they tried what if analysis, like if they tried no-till, if they tried a different crop based on what expected weather, based on soil type, based on predicted prices, and based on including carbon in the picture, are they going to benefit or not going to benefit? So that they are more informed when taking these choices. That would help in the adoption as well of any of the tools that we're talking about. The other thing I think, which is starting to get talked about now, but that was the foundation of when we started talking about farm beats, is around the lack of broadband. And there we need to do more to bring broadband, not just to the farmer's house, but to the farm, which is a different problem. And that is something we need everyone to rally around. It's not just a technical problem, it's a policy problem. It's everyone needs to rally together to make that happen, because if that happens, that's like a foundation that would drive the adoption of more digital tools in agriculture.
You're exactly right, Ranveer. And I was so glad to hear Steve commenting on the fact that we've done even more work at CALS to get more 5G to the farms, because that's just unlocking so much potential. And also your other comments related to that fed nicely into the next question, which was related to the fact that one of the biggest challenges in agriculture is actually the abundance of sensors and other data collecting devices, which in my opinion, and speaking with growers, has really created what we could call a cacophony of noise related to understanding better ways to manage the farm, because it's become a super cluttered space, and there's even more people getting interested in bringing these solutions forward. So how would you all propose, I was going to direct this to Cranos first, how can we establish industry and university partnerships to build integrated databasing and other tools to enable data analytics to truly come to life on the farm? It's just a small question, Cranos. It's just the crux of the problem.
I mean, I think the way that I see it, and Natalie, you made a comment on this earlier, which was, you can't change what you can't measure.
Yep.
And in truth, I would even go a step further in saying, well, you can't make decisions on data you can't manage.
Yeah.
So, if you have, abundance of information and you don't have clear tools to be able to really make sense of that information, it really acts as a significant hurdle to being able to do so. And that's not something that is only privy to stakeholders. This also happens in the research realm as well. So one of the things that we've been really looking at as part of the projects associated with the Plant Sciences Initiative is really looking at novel and useful industry academic partnerships that would help to accelerate the development of those types of tools, both for managing data and making decisions from those data, and coupling that with stakeholder-driven research projects to then be able to implement these things in a real-life scenario. And this is one of the things that we've been doing through the SAS Microsoft partnership and some specific pilot projects that we've been focused on. So I think that using those as potential examples would actually help to facilitate the use of those tools in other projects, because I think that's what a lot of researchers, particularly in academia, are missing. It's not that they can't collect the information, it's just that they spend a tremendous amount of time trying to make sense of it. So if we can really leverage and accelerate the development of these and to some extent systematize it, which is another thing that we're really trying to do as part of the data-driven plant sciences platform for the PSI, I think that we would be able to accelerate our ability to not only develop decisions and solutions from a research standpoint, but also have these underlying systems that could actually deliver solutions to stakeholders.
Thanks, Cranos. Does somebody want to add more points to that?
You want to jump in? As you alluded, I've been working, I'm the gray-headed guy in the room, so I've been working a long time with farmers. And during the 80s, the cutting edge farmers were developing production practices unique, and they'd apply to the whole farm, be 1,000 acres. And then over the next 10 years, they started saying, well, this field to do something. Really, the last 20 years, growers have been adopting spatial, and we hear about the grid sampling, and the technology is there to go into plant by plant. But I loved your cacophony of data on the farm, because that drilling down trend runs against the trend of consolidation. That now a small farm is 5 to 10,000 acres of row crop agriculture in the U.S. And so the innovations that you're talking about, Cranos, I think are just absolutely essential to make it so that those sensors can make intelligent decisions and adjust inputs on the go. And we got to think of a way for growers to provide oversight for that, because they're all self-selected to be independent customers, right? No one's going to stay in farming and risk that wealth and that accumulated knowledge and time unless they want to be their own boss. So somehow we've got to connect that desire to be their own boss with a system where they can utilize all that data coming in. I don't have the answer, but I think it's a limitation to adopting the kind of things that you're talking about.
And I did have a farmer say to me one time, with respect to trying out things on the farm, that he only had 35 times to get it right.
Oh, that's right.
And I felt that was really interesting, because it was a different way to look at the situation of the risk that's truly on the line when you try something new. So the idea that you would switch over and hand over all your decision power, to a system, like what level of trust and validation do you have to have, because there's so much on the line. So that was an interesting thought. Would Ranveer or Brent, would you like to comment on that question? Want to go ahead?
I can let you go first, Brent. I'll go.
Okay, go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, first of all, I love that quote. So I'll, if you don't mind, I'll use that going forward. So I think that's great, because we are inundated with data, and I think augmented decisions or deviance detection and really automating some of those decisions. And I think it's going to take some training, right, to be able to trust in that, and how often is it going to be off, and what's the risk of being off, right? So I think it's dependent for sure, and there always needs to be some human oversight for sure. And I think that's, as long as we keep that in mind, I think it goes back to a point that Peter made earlier on picking those individuals or those groups, maybe not even the individual, the groups that support technology and want the solution to be there. Because if you're solving the right issue and you're doing it in the right way and working together, I think that'll reap dividends and get you to where you want, whether it's 35 or 65 times.
Exactly. Thanks, Brent. Ranveer, would you like to wrap this one up?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think one of the other things we should ask ourselves is, what do we need the data for? What are the scenarios it is going to enable? And one of the new, like being on the tech side, one of the things we use a lot, we use data a lot for these days, is on AI, for artificial intelligence. That is, can you use data to predict what's going to come in the future? And there have been a lot of advances in AI, not much in the agriculture space, because, for ag, we say there is a lot of data, but there is not a lot of good data. A lot of data that we can use to start making good predictions. And this goes to the other part of the question which you had asked, was what's the role of academia? I think academia can play a very key role in curating the data, in making sure that these data sets are good, which can then be used to train the AI models. Like right now, one part of it is getting data from the farms, from the growers, and giving them, just showing them the data that they can interpret it and use it for certain actions. But I think the bigger value will come if we start enabling AI on top of this data, for which we really need academia, where there are professors, there are experts, there are students who work with industry, and they are the ones who can help provide these data sets, these curated data sets, which can help train the AI models, which we then can translate to growers. Because when we work directly with growers, it's hard to get access to a lot of data because of privacy concerns, and that's a valid concern. On the other hand, for the research farms, you try out different scenarios. These are in your control. Data might not be that much of an issue, which can then play a big role in bridging the gap towards enabling AI for farms.
I would say also, I can speak to it because I've been on different sides of the relationship, but also academia does hold a special relationship with growers in terms of a relationship of trust. So I think it would be a big miss if we didn't take that opportunity, you know, as
Yeah.
a community, to allow academia to be maybe the holding place for the data in a way that it could be trusted and not potentially have any concern from growers from that perspective. So that's actually an interesting thought that came up while you were saying that, Ranveer.
Yeah, no, great point.
Okay, the next question I'm going to first direct to Brent. And this is related to the fact that labor continues to be a serious challenge for farming operations, as I would say we're probably all aware of in agriculture. And particularly, this is a challenge in the animal agriculture industry. How can labor-intensive practices benefit from leveraging the use of mechanization to replace or complement skilled labor? And is there a way that we could utilize some of the thinking applied in row crop agriculture, such as large-scale planters, as you mentioned, that can move between farms, in the animal agriculture industry?
Yeah, I would say that there's no more noble business to be in than farming and agriculture, whether it's cotton and making clothes or feeding a growing world. So I think we all need to be proud that we're working in this area and continue to push that forward. From the livestock sector, and we've got a lot of talented individuals and people, and it's really about, in my opinion, leveraging that those talents and those people in the right way, and using technology to enable them to spend the proper amount of time and effort on animal care and in essentially every animal taken care of every day. And you know, I know we talked about having a lot of sensors, a lot of data, and I will say it's probably a point that we're probably the furthest behind in being able to use some of that data from an environmental side, modifying those or changing the environment from an air standpoint. Then we move on to feed and water, the next essential things for life. How do we automate those things? How do we keep those to where they need to be? And really enable our talented staff to be able to really take care of the things. Those are more on autopilot, now looking at the individual animal and really caring for them. So I think, and we talked about managing that data in a way to really either suggest or go ahead and make the decision and make some of those changes. Definitely not taking the human element out like I talked about before, but encouraging that and getting to a point where things are more automated. And I'd say for us, probably in the livestock sector, I think it starts at the farm, then gets down to the barn within the farm, then down to the pen, and ultimately to the pig to be able to monitor that. And I know that things are being worked on in each one of those. And as you get closer to the individual animal, how much more difficult or timely or costly that is, but we got to continue to work and get there. And I think what that will do will improve from a sustainability side. Essentially, what we do is take the ingredients or the crops from the field and turn that into a high protein source. And so how do we do that more efficiently, whether it's to reduce the carbon footprint, to improve manure and manure application and feeding back to the fields and the ground. So whether that be through precision feeding or marketing the pigs at the right time, the most efficient way, all of those can lead to better efficiencies and sustainability. So I think those are key. That's from probably the data rich standpoint. I think there's also an opportunity from a robotic standpoint to automate those activities that are tough to do, that are repetitive in motion and nature, and frankly, not that pleasant to do.
Mm-hmm.
A few that come to mind are vaccination of animals, hugely important to the health and success of that animal and its welfare. But at the same time, picking up those animals is tedious, and there's got to be a better way to do it. Power washing would be another one from a biosecurity health standpoint, extremely important, but anybody that's been on the other end of a power washer knows what that takes to get done. And then moving animals definitely is an opportunity as well. So some key places that if we could solve some of those, utilize the data in a way to help make decisions or prioritize people's time, I think is a huge improvement. And those perhaps aren't giant leaps forward, but are the next frontier in going forward there.
I'll make a leap here. I see that Todd sees here from animal science. I know that we have fantastic facilities at CALS to do that kind of work right here at Lake Wheeler and also out at Tidewater. If anybody wanted to model those kinds of systems out, that's for sure. Let's make a pitch there, Deborah's behalf. So
I'd
go
just
ahead,
like
Peter.
to follow up on what Brent was saying, because I think the automation robotics is the expanded universe of labor. You know, farmers and ginners are, and livestock people are concerned about labor on the farm, but we're really in a good situation because of what you said. You know, feeding the world is a very honorable profession. And so a lot of interest in the labor which is off the farm, creating those innovations. And so we've got to just make sure that the students coming along, that they see the value of putting their clever ideas into agriculture, even if they don't come from a farm background at all,
Exactly.
and creating those things that are going to help us on farm.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the only thing that I could add is really from the perspective of someone on the, let's say on the engineering side, where I think that it is easier to see opportunities for technology development on the sensor side of engineering, on the data side of engineering, but possibly not always on the mechanistic side of engineering. And I think that opening the realm, opening the doors in terms of a better understanding of the different types of problems and the nuances that are going to be associated with use cases that are specific to agriculture may be an excellent opportunity for other types of disciplines to really get involved. And I think that this is where possibly that innovation can lie.
And a lot of people, I think, are much more, also coming out of COVID, much more interested and connected to the way we grow food and all elements of it. So there could be some opportunities to tap into some of that interest. Did you want to add to this question, Ranveer?
Yeah, no, and thanks for including me, by the way. I know being remote is hard. And I
No,
think,
for sure.
Yeah, and Adrian is trying to get me there in a month. So I'm looking forward to the visit. I really like NC State quite a lot. So going back to the question, I like the points that were raised. And I'm one, for example, going to Kater's point, I'm not from an agricultural background. In the sense, I did a PhD in computer science, and my undergrad was in computer science. I did grow up, spent a lot of time growing up in a farm in India with my grandparents. But back then, I don't have good memories of that I didn't like those times in the farms. I've talked about it before, where these villages, they didn't have any electricity, no toilets. And the first 18 years of my life, I spent a lot of time there. But maybe that's what sparks all these ideas about, maybe this could change, maybe something else could change. So I've spent a lot of time over the last 5, 6, 7 years talking to experts in agriculture, like the professors at NC State, like people at Cargill, at Cotton Incorporated, and so on. And I've learned a lot, and at UPL, other companies that are represented there. And some of the ideas in this case around livestock, some of the ideas that we've been exploring are around two things. One is around improving productivity for farmers. That is, can we, through things like precision nutrition, can you help them get more by giving the right feed to the right animal? And the way to do that is both. Part of it is monitoring, figuring out what is what, but also the rest of it is around working on the genomic side, mapping phenomes to genomes. This is all so early, but those are some of the things that we've started to work on with partners to try to light up these scenarios around getting more from every investment in every animal. And the second part, first part was on productivity, second is on profitability, which is going to the points, a lot of it that was mentioned in the panel. That is, can you track things and then give alerts at the right time so that you don't always need labor? You can reduce the amount of labor needed by getting them to act at the right place at the right time. And there, things like sensors, cameras, drones, all of those things come in. We are working on more on the backbone, like how do you get the data, including edge compute, cloud, using AI to raise alerts, working with partners on sensors, working with people who understand agriculture to even know when to raise the alert and things like that. But I think those are both the scenarios where data and AI can really help the livestock farmer, both with profitability and productivity.
Thanks, Ranveer. The next question I have will be open to the floor, so whichever panelist wants to jump on it first. I will say, and this is related to the topic that was mentioned actually earlier, which is related to data ownership. This has been a hot topic in the ag space for quite some time, really, I think since farmers had the capability to know, that their data was going into a cloud somewhere and what was happening with it. And I think that as all of us have gotten more connected, and even we suspect, and we maybe have a love-hate relationship with Google, and the fact that our phones are hearing everything we're doing, it gives us convenience, but it also gives a little concern around who is hearing and collecting what. So based on this, who do you believe owns the data that's coming off of the farm? And what can the industry do to ensure data security for farmers and remove this as a barrier to adoption of the many tools that we could bring?
I could start first, or at least someone starting there. Brent, you're
Oh, you
starting.
can go ahead, Ranveer. Why don't you start, please?
Yeah, no, so, I'm not in the agriculture industry. So my opinion is more as an outsider, the way we think what we need to do to enable this. So at Microsoft, through the tools that we are building, we don't have access to the data. We are essentially providing the tools that people can use to securely and share data in a privacy preserving way. So things like at edge compute, think of it like a computer sitting in the farm, where you can then have the control to say what data goes where. Or in the cloud, we are building technologies such as Azure Data Share, where once the data is there, you can then say this data can be shared with so-and-so person. And some of the new work we did was around being able to see who has access to what data in the cloud. So building all of these tools. Some of the new work we've done that is on things like confidential compute or homomorphic encryption. These are papers that we've written at Microsoft Research. Differential privacy is another one, where we've given mathematical proofs in ways in which what compute you can do on the data without sharing the data. So for example, you want to make predictions, you want to build some sort of a tool on the data, but you don't get access to the data. How do you do that? Like, a simple example is if you're on your phone, you're typing a few letters, and then it gives you suggestions of what word you're looking to type. The way it does that is behind the scenes, it uses a technology called differential privacy, which was one of the papers written at Microsoft Research back in 2010, which means that not all the data from your phone, not all the key presses are sent to the cloud, but you're still getting the benefits of AI. So these are tools that we are building that can help with data sharing. But that doesn't answer the core question that who has access to the data. And that is something which we at Microsoft, we believe that this is an important question, and it comes up again and again, especially when you think of what can you do with the data? What kind of AI can you run on that data? So at Microsoft, for example, we took a stance against image data. That is, we said that there should be policy safeguards around how is image data being used. The same camera data that can be used to unlock your phone can be used to track people in places where they shouldn't be tracked. And that's some place where we realize that it is important. This needs more discussion. It's probably not just a company or a few of us that can take a role. And this is where I think, again, another one of those cases where academia, the policy people in academia should also take a look at this around who has access to the data, also should take into account how can the data be used or misused. But the other thing is, if people could share data, if we could build a construct around it, this would drive a lot of efficiencies around food safety, around traceability, around many scenarios, and efficiencies across the entire food supply chain, if such a data sharing construct was put together. So this is an important problem. We don't know the answer to how you could share it. At Microsoft, we are building some of the tech tools to enable better data sharing.
As I was traveling around in Europe during the last few weeks, I went to many countries. They're all under this European Union, but it was quite interesting, all the different things I had to do for COVID tracking.
Yeah.
Logging into different systems, doing different tests. It was quite, and I thought, wow, this gave me insights into how difficult it is to do things like track and trace.
Yeah.
I mean, the technology is just, it's not,
Yeah.
I would eventually wind up with a QR code or something, but I wondered why these systems aren't integrated in any type of fashion. And it was just kind of an illustration of how tricky it was on me, if I could think of myself like an apple, transporting around these places and having to register myself everywhere I went in a different system. But it was interesting. Did you want to comment on that question, Brent?
Yeah, I think I was the one that asked the question, not
Yes.
necessarily to answer the question, but to get others' opinions and thought on that as well. Because I think that's one of the challenges that our growers, producers, customers seek is there's independent sources of either sensors and or solutions that aren't necessarily brought together to get the most out of that data. And so I think that's going to be important, fundamental question of how we're going to do that, how that's going to look. And again, I don't have the answers, but I think it's a real question to understand and navigate through to be successful in the future from a collaborative standpoint. Yeah.
I'm just going to echo what Brent said and hand it over to Cranos. We have a great example. You know, if you walk into someone's field and you make a discovery and you're not invited to that field, there's some real issues, right? About that you don't own it. you identify a plant that's novel or something like that. Now you fly a drone over it, you make a discovery. I don't think you own that. You just can't do that over a grower's field. Now you can fly a plane over and you can make a discovery. You can fly a satellite over and make. So where is that gradient from who owns it? Starting from walking to the field, being a little bit up. So I think this is a really complex issue that's not going to go away. And that really needs to have that vigorous discussion as technology develops. So I'll hand it over for the solution here.
Oh, no. I mean, I think one of the things that has been captured by all of the comments thus far is that it's extremely complicated. Yeah. And all I could do is raise additional complexities. You know, for example, we talked earlier about really trying to enable and facilitate stakeholder-driven research, especially from this perspective of not only data collection, but data management and decision-making. Factored into that is the problem where to do that, you have to collect various amounts of data at stakeholders' facilities. Mm-hmm. And even though it's for research purposes, if you start expanding this to things like university industry partnerships, you now start to have these multi-point agreements that need to be made, not just between, say, NC State and this stakeholder, but between NC State, Microsoft, this other company, another company, and this stakeholder, which again is ridiculously, it starts to become even more complex. Mm-hmm. And this is even before the stakeholder really starts to understand, well, what is the ultimate value of what's being developed in the first place? Yeah. So I think a lot of effort really does need to be made in terms of having these constructs, as Ranveer put it, or having these systems that would allow us to identify ways to strategically do this, whether it's from the policy perspective, whether it's from the engagement perspective, or whether it's from the technology perspective, or potentially all of the above. This needs to be addressed to be able to facilitate what we've been talking about through the entire discussion.
You're right, yeah. It's a core challenge.
And I think it's that fear of unintended use of that data, right? Exactly. So what risk am I having by, I want to solve the problem both short and long term, but what's my risk? What's my risk exposure? And who else is going to get access to data that's unintended? That's definitely the biggest concern, I think. Mm-hmm. But well said.
Probably even different. Yeah, I would, now that I'm thinking about this from the animal ag side versus a row crop farmer not wanting some company to, know all their budgeting and their whole share, the wallet, so they can determine what share of wallet they might try to, I think that's where some of these things are rooted in. Yeah, for sure, those fears. So we have one final question now, and then I think we'll open it up to the room. And also there's a question online. So the final topic is one that I mentioned actually in my opening remarks that was on my mind a lot during this recent trip through Europe. And this is related to carbon sequestration and what we can all do to contribute to this global challenge that we're all looking to resolve. And Delta Airlines, it was interesting on my flight home, the Delta Airlines little, safety video, of course, they're all welcome back, to our friendly skies. But also they announced it was this really compelling video that was about the fact that we want to get you back out in the world, but we don't want to do it at the cost of the planet. And it was an interesting point where they were showing somebody in a pretty scenery and then like a dump there because of the fact that, this could be some of the impact of some of the travel. So they've actually set a goal to be the first airline to become carbon neutral, which I thought was interesting. That was their video speech that they did before they did the safety video. And also UPL has launched a gigaton challenge to sequester a gigaton of carbon by, I think it's 2030. I'm not exactly sure about the deadline there, but this is something that internally we've stated as an intention. And this is one area where I believe farmers are very well positioned to be part of the solution, which I think, again, this is a great moment for agriculture. We have often suffered from different perceptions and misperceptions about how we grow crops, the way industrial agriculture works. And we can really be part of the solution here to change the game for the world in terms of the problems that we're facing and become stewards of the land, because that is what we do. So what would you say, Cater? I wanted to start with you first, because I think in this room here, you're the closest to row crop farmers of any of us, really. What would you say that US farmers are doing to contribute to sequestering carbon in the soil right now? What are some things happening?
Well, it's a very positive story. We've seen the corn belt, the soybean belt, the cotton belt, even permanent crops, the adoption of conservation tillage practices. And admittedly, they've been adopted for those immediate benefits I've talked about on erosion, but clever scientists like those at NC State have created packages, system packages, that provide all those other ancillary benefits. It really keeps the growers doing it year after year, such as better rainwater infiltration and better nutrient management. So the data is just outstanding in terms of the adoption of conservation tillage practices. And we're fortunate that those just happen to sequester carbon. And I think that, so we got a really good base to build from if we can expand the systems to really elevate that. I just wanted to, since we're in a data center here, this is from NC State, Ellen Franz-Lubers, and he shows that 150 fields, commercial fields, a half a metric ton per year sequestration of carbon in the soil with cover crops and no-till. So it really is significant. A great story coming out in that area. A lot more to be done, though.
Yeah, it's really remarkable to me how quickly the conversation has changed from regenerative agriculture being this fringe thing going on to really having a chance in the center to try to see what we can all do to try to adopt these practices. Does somebody else have any stories to share about what you know that farming is doing to contribute to carbon sequestration?
I could start.
Okay,
can't see everyone. Yeah, I could mention. So at Microsoft, as you know, last year we made a big commitment to climate change. We said we will be carbon negative by 2030, and by 2050 we would remove all the emissions that we've ever generated since Microsoft was founded. Now that's a big, bold commitment to make. And the way we realize, even to the 2030 goal, the way we'll get there is we will reduce our emissions. We have steps that we are going to take, significant steps from removing diesel to making our data centers more efficient and all that. That's one way, but that's not going to be enough. We will need new ways to figure out, to take carbon from the atmosphere. We will need to buy carbon offsets. And one of the ways in which we can do that is through agriculture. So this year, actually, we made the biggest corporate purchase of carbon ever. We bought 1.3 million metric tons of carbon. And that's a big one, right? That's a big commitment. And of that, we bought 100,000 from Land O'Lakes for agriculture. This is for soil carbon. This is, again, we realize that there are a lot of unknowns when we think of soil carbon. People still don't know things like how permanent it is, how are you going to quantify the amount of soil carbon in an economical way so that you can actually set a market. But we realize that unless we make bets, this industry won't move forward. So at Microsoft, we did make that purchase. We are working with different stakeholders in agriculture. Like one of the work we're doing is with Ohio State, for example, with Professor Lal's group on soil carbon, on trying to come up with low-cost ways to estimate soil carbon. Because one of the challenges is, given a piece of land, how much carbon is sequestered? Now you could send people to go take the measurements, but that's going to be very expensive. How and you could do it in a lightweight way, but then it won't be accurate. Like people won't be fine if Microsoft says we offset so much of our emissions, but on the other hand, that number wasn't correct. So you need a low cost, accurate way to estimate the amount of carbon sequestered in soil. There's some really good work coming out of Europe as well. John Crawford and his team, they're doing some really cool work. So there is a lot of innovation happening in this space. A lot more needs to be done, but I think we are optimistic on where this is headed. And I think using some of these practices that we were just talking about, conservation tillage, reduced tillage, low till, no till, or even cover cropping, if nothing else, it's great for the soil. It's great for the planet, even if it doesn't sequester as much carbon you're talking about. So there are a lot of unknowns, lots of very interesting problems in this space, but it is also so important for all of us. And at Microsoft, being a tech company, we do have climate commitments, and we are actively following and building tools to help people who are working in this space.
Thanks, Ranveer. So with that, I think that there's one question in the Q&A, so maybe there's two there? Okay. Okay. You wanna? Oh, hello, voice of the Q&A.
Yes, we have a question from Pierre. He asked, which link has been the most effective at driving precision ag adoption? Extension, distribution, big ag, or big farms?
Well, I was thinking it was auto steer. I think that auto steer is the most adopted. So I guess that's big ag. That would be my opinion. I mean, that was John Deere.
It didn't take much in terms of extension, but we should not cut short the role of extension on these, because as I mentioned, farms are optimized, and having well-trained extension specialists and agents out there working with those farmers, developing that trust and relationship, that's just really essential for adoption. And it's part of the success story we have here in the US that other countries like India really suffer from.
Yeah, and I think that it needs to be something that people believe they need. So it's it needs to be meeting the best things meet an unfelt need that somebody didn't even know they needed. But you're right, extension is the perfect partner to help farmers to connect with those solutions. Somebody else from the panel have a thought? Okay, other questions? No? Or yeah, we can take questions from in the room.
There's a comment in here that says, one example of data curation in academia is Google's Baseline Precision Health Initiative in Kannapolis, North Carolina.
Okay.
Duke University and Stanford are curating the data to maintain privacy.
Oh, great. That's cool. We should really reference off of that.
Yeah.
How that could be applied to agriculture. I agree. I mean,
Yeah,
what's
in fact,
more important than your private health information, really?
Right. Another, in fact, a related story around this is work we did with Royal Bank of Canada. This kind of data sharing comes up often in the financial services industry, where we did a work with Royal Bank of Canada where they used confidential compute. So confidential compute is, you can think of right now, when you encrypt data, so when you're when the data is at rest, it is encrypted. But when you have to perform operations on the data, you have to decrypt and perform operations on top of the data. With confidential compute, your data is encrypted even when it is being worked upon. So it's like a hardware-based way where you can rent these VMs, which are actually the compute is still running it encrypted in hardware. And with Royal Bank of Canada, they then enabled this with multiple retailers who shared information. So essentially, you can think of customers of Royal Bank of Canada whose information, some of the information were gotten from the retailers to provide this personalized service without really getting access to the data itself. So the retailers didn't have to share all of the data with Royal Bank of Canada, but you could still enable these data sharing scenarios. So this goes back to some of the new tools that are being built, cryptographic methods that are being used to facilitate data sharing. I'll have to read up a bit more about the one at Duke University, but I'm assuming in the healthcare space, it is very similar.
Thanks, Ranveer. Are there questions from the floor?
Hi, this might be a question that goes to Cater first, but I'm reaching back to the first question, and you were alluding to no-till. And I think you're alluding to the fact that it took actually quite a long time to adopt that. And that's really interesting to me because I was sitting on one of the larger research farms in the US back in the 90s and reading the papers that said no-till, and the data would tell you very useful, even before all those use cases were really developed against the benefits. And so the comment about it being, you've got to deliver the easy button. Well, in that case, the easy button is actually in the title. No till.
But it's so rewarding to till the soil, right?
So here's my question. With all technology adoption by whoever your stakeholders are, communication is extremely important. What I mean, in your mind and the panel's mind, what was some of the learnings there where you've seen it take a long time to adopt something that's patently obvious and patently beneficial for any number of reasons? What communication of that technology, if that's what you want to call it, would be something you would adopt today to help things move faster?
Boy, that's a wonderful thing to drill down into, because when no-till was being encouraged with growers, they had to overcome this huge impediment. In fact, there was one company that called it farm ugly, because farmers put so much of their personal pride into how their fields look to their neighbors, right? And their fathers and everyone else. And so leaving all that trash on the farm, with no-till, that was a part of the sentiment. And also, usually the parents are still around. They may not be directly involved in farming practices. So I think that there were some real drags on no-till. So I think the communication, probably a big part of the communication that really helped, you hit on the button with the no, in that instead of having the discussion on how the fields looked and what the yields were, but what was the profit? What was the economic, and we heard that from Brent, the economics, once people got to that part of the discussion, that, we don't need all these tractors, we don't need all these discs, we're not welding all this stuff during the winter, and moving away from, from the visual and thinking, getting it down to an economic discussion. I think that was a big part of it. But great question, thank you. Any comment from Will?
The only thing that I can add to is the perspective that assessing, quantifying, and qualifying value is not as straightforward as we sometimes think it is. And it's not as clear often that what should be a value is actually a value. And I think I know I see that personally, oftentimes in the type of interdisciplinary research that we do. And you have situations where you have social scientists, engineers, biologists, they all have different things that they actually value. And some of it is training, some of it is expertise, some of it is otherwise. And I think that what you bring up seems to be something similar, where we have to really put a lot of time and effort into trying to qualify and quantify the underlying value, because sometimes the things that seem to make the most sense may not make, I want to say would not make sense to the other individual, but may not be as valuable to the other for whatever reason. And having that as part of the conversation to then try to change possible actions may be key. And this is where there's a possible significant role for social scientists in this whole process to really help to do that.
Yeah, I think in my experience, the most effective people in extension work are the ones who think about behavioral science and sociology all the time, because it's all about how could you show the benefit and of making a behavioral change, because that's what all this comes down to.
I'm just going to add a little vignette to that. I agree totally with what Cranos is saying. There was a grower, Mark Borba, who's a farmer in the San Joaquin Valley. He got up at a big grower meeting called the Beltwide, I think it was 1981, and he told the audience of 5,000, profit, profit, profit. That's why I do this. And before that, that was almost a swear word for growers to get up. They were supposed to talk about, the culture part of it and turning it into a hardcore business discussion. But the values, understanding the values and is just absolutely critical on that. Great point, Karen.
Did you want to add anything, Ranveer?
No, as I was just thinking of the role that technology can play. What we have, so technology is never a solution. It provides tools, and I think here some of the tools which I was talking about around what if analysis tools, things like if you have a website or you have an app where a grower can go input everything they've done. Some of it can just be learned from the past, and you can then try out different things about what seed you plant, when do you fertilize, whether you do till or no till. And things like, there is a farmer we work with in Eastern Washington. He farms 9,000 acres. And one of the things I've learned from him, so we give him these tools and we learn from him, is that his entire farm is not homogeneous. There are some places, he says, there are some places I really need to apply chemicals to control the weeds. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And that is where we need to enable farmers to make those decisions rather than saying, blanket things like no till, no chemicals, and so on. And those are the tools where technology can play a role. And this is where one of the things we're using is some of the mechanistic models that have been built in academia around like crop growth. If you plant a particular crop, particular seed type, how is it going? What's the expected yield? And to be able to do that, to do what if analysis on top of that. These are tools that can, when again, working with the extension agents, working with the social scientists, this could be used to educate growers around what can and might not work, even telling them the trade-offs so that they can then take the right decisions. I think that's where technology can play a role in this too.
Exactly.
Your profit analogy or example kind of brought something to mind. Is there was at one time was working with a producer that it was all about the pig, and that was the mindset of the people. It's about the pig's well-being, those types of things. And even within that organization, it took a little bit, but now it's about the people first. And so I think maybe back to some of this when we talk about the profitability, I think some of those soft costs are being included more in that decision. And I would say as time goes on, and whether it's generational or just over time, change will happen faster. You hear that a lot, but I think even in the farming sector, I would expect that to continue to change, and the evolution of how fast things are going to change, I would expect to continue going forward. So.
Well, and businesses that are not profitable are not in existence. So I think it's on all of us to help farmers to be able to achieve that, while all these other expectations are now being landed at their doorstep in ways they can contribute. Are there other questions or comments from the audience?
The last two gentlemen that spoke took some of what I want to say, and I'd say that you hit the nail on the head. But in terms of, I think it also takes, Natalie, the fact that all of you sitting here who are PhDs or in management positions in a large corporation recognize and respect the people at the farm level. I know Pioneer has a new commercial that I wish I could have recorded, but it basically says logistics, business management, agronomists, human resources. A farmer has to do it all. Yeah. And quite often, I think they feel like we as a group in industry and in academia fly in and say, you can do this better. Do what I tell you to do. And they look
we
at
all
us
love
and
that, right?
Very humbly, usually they don't say it, but they think, have you ever walked in my shoes is what goes through their mind. So I think the other piece of this, and I think that Dr. Worsham did it very well with no-till, and in weed science, those people have often been close to the farm. But when we have these conversations, we need to be involving people at the farm level, and not just those that are politically active and always the grower president or whatever, but farmers are innovators always. you know, and those that have survived, we also need to respect how much change they've already been through. Because the reason we went from it being a way of life discussion to a business discussion is because that is no longer a choice.
Exactly.
You know, that has changed at the farm level. So I would just encourage anyone in here who is a leader in this to engage with people at the farm level and not just depend on extension to do that. And also to have the respect to try to bring the information to the farmers in terms of, there's a lot of questions at the farm level about carbon credits. And, you know, farmers are very intelligent people. They may not have PhDs or master's degrees or even a BS, but they can understand and do better than we do what goes on in every different soil type they have, with every different crop they have, depending on what the weather does. We need to maximize learning from them.
I completely agree. Yeah,
Well said. Thank you.
very much, Kelly, definitely.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, I think we should probably wrap up now. Huh, Debbie? I just wanted to wrap up. One thing as a panel, I think even when we were preparing, we wanted to we didn't want to leave the group with, these are big problems that we're all working to solve. But there is a huge potential that we can come together and at least start chipping away. We already are doing quite a bit of this. I know Cranos keeps trying to get that grant that will solve and unlock a lot of these things. So I admire his persistence on this. I know it takes multiple rounds, but even seeing some of the thought that was going into some of these ideas coming out of state to holistically look at these problems, but also tackle it piece by piece so that we can build solutions that will address the needs of growers, like Kelly indicated, which I think also included a lot of grower interaction in the plans that I saw, which was one of the reasons why I thought it could be successful. But the future is bright, and now is the time that we can contribute as an industry to the sustainability targets that are set around the world, and especially this objective around a carbon neutral future, which I think we're all aware is really important for the future of the planet and ourselves. And strong partnerships are going to be the way that we can enable scientists working with industry and farmer customers and also consumers of the food and the whole ecosystem there to unlock these opportunities. And I also wanted to just make a pitch for any students that are out here to know that these are big problems, but we need your brains to be applied to them to help unlock the solutions, because it's going to take time, you know, for all of us to work towards this. And I know many of the faculty programs are really active here and looking for students. And I'm also currently hiring interns as well, mostly from CALS and NC, and other schools in the area, to see what we can bring into the industry to start engaging with us on solving these fascinating problems for the future. So with that, I want to thank Deborah and the faculty at CALS and the administration for inviting me here to have the panel speak. And thank you to all the panelists for your comments. And we hope to see you here when you come. Ranveer, come by the site at UPL as well. I'd like to.
Look forward to that. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for that. And hi, Adrian. Chaz said to say hi. I thought I was going to see you here. So I'll wrap up now. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have to take over now.
Oh, I turned it off. I apologize.
And okay, so thank you, Natalie. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the folks in the room and online that asked so many interesting questions, and what a great conversation. This is the part that if you've been to an event, a showcase event before, you were expecting. This is our fast and furious presentations by 5 faculty. These are so what we did was we looked for 5 faculty members who had emerging research projects, hence the name. Something new, something that would benefit from external stakeholder involvement. And so these 5 have been chosen, but it's a tough decision, as you might imagine. There are a lot more projects available than we have time for. So what we're going to have is the 5 minutes presentation, 5 for Q&A. It'd be interesting to try to manage both at the same. Couple of just a ground rule. There will be no confidential information shared at this event because the thought of confidentiality agreements with all of you just makes me ill. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to look for the potential, because Cranos mentioned this, the potential for what he called stakeholder-driven research partnerships. And when you find those, Erin, who is in the room, and Dinah and I will be very glad to help you make those happen. It's my pleasure to turn things over to Chris Reberg-Horton. Chris is a professor of organic cropping systems. He's also the Plant Sciences Initiative Platform Director for Resilient Agriculture Systems. The title of his presentation is Translational Pipelines for Agricultural Research. Chris.
Sorry for you poor board members. It's the same slides I showed earlier. Fortunately for you, I'm at the stage of life where I forget what I'm doing and I never say the same thing twice anyway. So it'll be a completely new presentation for you. So I just wanted to start off with an overview because I think we've got a couple faculty here who are part of this grant. I want to talk about how the Plant Sciences Initiative is trying to support translational research and how we're trying to partner with industry in that support, which I think is very germane for today. One of the things that we have really started to identify that's occurring here on our campus that I think is very much what occurs in academia is that we have a lot of folks that are interested in agriculture right now, probably for the first time in their careers. Agriculture is really having its moment where we're getting a lot of attention from engineers. We're getting data scientists interested in agriculture, but academia is divided into pretty narrow disciplines. And so we have each a little bit of a chunk that we would like to play in this overall development of new technology. But individual labs do not have all the pieces that it takes to get things all the way out the door. So, I mean, give a good example of where a lot of my own personal work has been in the last few years is that, you know, we find an engineering group that has some new type of sensor, some new type of IoT device. And they were there and they discovered that without any real mind application at first. It's just like, oh, we can do this with light now. Oh, we can do this with some other form of EM now. Look, maybe I could do that, do something with that in medicine. Maybe I could do something with that in agriculture. And they start exploring. They got a new hammer, they're looking around for a nail to whack with it. And they do. I mean, they find an amazing number of these sort of proof of concepts where you can show, wow, this new sensor type measured something about a soybean plant. That looks interesting. They publish the paper and it dies there. And so the question we had at Plant Sciences Initiative is, how do we support getting more of those proof of concept papers further along the pipeline? Not all the way to a commercial prototype. That is not what we do at university, right? That's where we need the partnership with industry. But there are so many proof of concepts coming out right now that it's too much for industry to sort through all of that and figure out where the real gems are and what remains, should remain on the shelf. And so we're asking ourselves, how can we help figure out which ones of those have the best legs, help de-risk those for industry, get some user feedback, work directly with the farmers to figure out, is this got legs? Does this have legs? Can we make something out of this new technology? So that's where we're trying to, this most recent grant that PSI helped form a coalition to put forward on the called the Farm of the Future. We really looked around for some use cases, and we'll hear again from 2 of those today, for folks who had already done the proof of concept research. And now we want to bring some of the other expertise to the table that they don't have to push it along. So part of that oftentimes is wireless networking. You heard earlier today about AirPaw. That's a new investment. That's a new group that really specializes in wireless. And so as that test bed is there, if you have a new tech, we can try out maybe LoRa. It's master making me crazy. We can try out LoRa for you. We can try out TV white space for you. Maybe this belongs on a cellular. You can try out a range of wireless technologies specific to your IoT device, see which one is the best fit, given your data stream, your data density, other considerations. The other thing that we do, guess what? NC State is an ag school. We've got a lot of applied agricultural scientists there. If you want to get a new piece of technology in the hands of a grower and let them interact with it and provide feedback about whether that's ultimately going to be useful, we got those people. We got to put them, they've got to meet all the folks that are over here doing this fundamental engineering research, put them together so they can get that user testing. So if we think about the resources that we have to leverage around here, I mean, I think it's a really unique case. I mean, AirPaw again there's almost no facility like that. So we're uniquely poised to get that wireless on there. We also, as was made mention before, we have one of the most diverse developed research station systems in the country. If we can get them up, somebody said, we'd like to get them to the 21st century. There's a couple I'd pass for getting to the 20th century. But if we really focus and make that the digital ag research stations, that's the place where we can try out all these new technologies and let the growers first interact with them. First see what field deployment looks like and get us again. Now that user feedback, that is core to what we're talking about with the de-risking. Once a company has seen, at least this is the feedback we've been getting so far, and I welcome other industry folks here to comment on this. You get some of that first user feedback from the farmer saying, okay, I see what this fits in. I see what the economic value of that might be. Now you've got something to base a fundraising campaign around, to go and borrow money from a bank or to go to VCs and say, yes, we've already gotten to this stage. We see what that value is. It's a lot less risk than that proof of concept paper sitting there on the library shelf was. This is just an example. My own lab has been working and collaborating with engineering groups around some different technologies. And we have been through this exact same process. So that's what we're trying to replicate. I want you to keep in mind from some of these other presentations later today about what that looks like. I mean, a first thing that I learned as part of this process is if you're going to release an IoT system, you have to jam a couple words together and put capitals in crazy places because you just can't go to market any other way. But what we have done with these is we have this two-tiered approach where the first thing we do is beta test is we get out there on research stations again, check it out in the field, but then we package it up, we put it in a box and we send it to other states with just a sheet of instructions. And we watch them generally fail so that we learn where those points of failures are. And then once we've been through that, then we do a national rollout. And so these next year, we've got, for the top 3, we got 25 states that will begin in these boxes to try those out in on-farm trials. And so that's the kind of de-risking that we're really talking about providing to other teams. All right, that's my 5 minutes, I'm sure. Oh. Do I have time for questions?
You do have time for questions. Are there questions in the room or are there questions online? Chris, you were crystal clear.
I'm sold on that.
Got that project we were working on with IBM.
The stress cam, yeah.
Yeah, the stress cam.
Yeah.
How's that going?
Good. You know, actually, there's a neat story in stress cam about wireless communication. So we have trained just a simple camera to take a picture of crop canopy every 15 minutes, and it assesses whether there's any leaf wilt occurring. And so then the grower gets, you know, this daily report of your crop canopy had some leaf wilt signs for this many hours of the day at this time. Like we saw some wilt start at 3 o'clock, it ended by 5. The next day it might be like it came at 2 o'clock, and you know, the length of time at which you spend under some kind of wilt conditions correlates to yield reduction. So they get this sort of daily report of how much stress they're carrying that day. growers do not like to just get a notification from AI without any proof. And so when we first went with RF on that, we went with a 3G board. And so we're just getting cellular. We're just getting the score. The growers get the little thing. Oh, well, can you send me a picture? No, we cannot send you a picture. Well, so then that's where we've actually partnered with Microsoft to upgrade to TV whitespace. TV whitespace gets us a better data density. I cannot send the grower every single picture, but I can send them like an example stressed picture from that day. And so they have, oh, okay, all right, that is definitely a wilted soybean. I believe you now. And so sometimes that connection really, again, didn't know that until we had the user feedback. Should have been obvious to me, but we didn't.
I think industry partners might be curious to know that opportunity also came together through a student project in undergraduate in engineering. I thought that was a really fascinating thing. And then Chris had a postdoc work on it. And so they put their minds to a real problem. And also it was quite cost efficient for the university as well. So yeah, that was interesting.
Thank you, Chris. Oh, nope. Is there another? Wait for the microphone, Nella.
Can't yell through this mask. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So great presentation. I guess what is the ask here, Chris? So if industry is interested in following up in any of these gadgets or testing a gadget, or what are you looking for from the industry partners?
That's a great question. If you're interested in my gadgets, welcome. But I was more thinking about how do we connect you to all the array of gadgets that are going on here in North Carolina? And so, I think that's one of the things that I'm asking industry for input on is how does PSI continue to put up the whole menu or the tapas bar so that you see them all coming down the line. And you're like, oh yeah, that one looks interesting. What's the format there for that would speak to you on that? So.
You want a dashboard and likes. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nella. Let's go ahead and move on, but during the networking portion, one more. Lavasine. Wait for the microphone.
Yeah, just question about the weeds 3D. What is the value proposition there?
Good question. So another simple thing, because I'm an agronomist, not an engineer. So, but we partnered with the engineering group here on campus, Edgar Lobaton's lab. And the idea is a stereoscopic camera that's low cost, inexpensive, that is taking a three-dimensional map of every weed it encounters and identifying the species. So at the end of the day, the grower gets a complete map of every species of weed in their fields and what size it was at the time that it was seen. And again, we developed this mainly as a research tool for our researchers around the country that are doing these transects. But we are coming up with a tractor variant so that when a grower is out there anyway, it's going ahead and mapping. It's not an extra trip across the field, but you can have this on multiple different types of booms and that you're mapping your weeds continuously whenever you're out there.
So these are great questions. I hate to ruin a great conversation, but Chris, you're staying for the networking.
I will.
All right. So if you'll pass the clicker and the mic to Anders, then we will move on. So our next presenter is Anders Husa. Anders is an assistant professor and extension specialist in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. We had to take all of his projects and we had to limit him because he's got so many great projects. So today he's speaking about computerized vision for detecting field-evolved lepidopteran resistance to BT maize.
Thanks. So as an extension person, I can be a little long-winded, so this can be quick synopsis of what we're doing here. So this project is led by a few faculty at NC State, namely myself and Michael Kudnoff, an engineering and electrical engineer who does a lot of this image processing, semantic segmentation algorithms to classify images. And Mike and I have worked together on a few different things, and we came up with this idea in direct response to an EPA scientific advisory panel recommendation to be able to monitor BT resistance expressed in corn and cotton using sentinel sweet corn plots. And being an entomologist that got trained in traditional field evaluations, I knew that these observations based on the EPA recommended threshold for damage to trigger regulatory action would be really challenging for entomologists to measure in the field. And so we undertook this project to come up with a better idea or a better method to be able to characterize injury. So basically what we're talking about is genetically engineered crops. Everybody's familiar with that. Expressing Bt toxins, they're probably the cornerstone of pest management in the US and globally. The EPA has proposed to monitor resistance evolution in lepidopteran pests, namely corn earworm, Helicoverpa, using these sentinel plots. Visual damage estimates are always really a challenge for entomologists, and they can be really inconsistent. One goal we had is let's measure how inconsistent they can be. I know the older generation thinks they do things really consistently, but we knew that that probably wasn't the case. And that the real risk here is false positives and false negatives could trigger regulatory actions that involve insecticide sprays on large acreages and potentially the removal of really valuable technology from the growers' hands. And so this is a way that we were really thinking about doing a better job of monitoring. So there's an established sentinel plot network that's being run by a faculty member, Galen Dively at University of Maryland. He ships the same seed of sweet corn of 5 different varieties, expressing different Bt toxins to 49 locations. And then the collaborators are expected to monitor the incidence of injury out of each one of these plots. That information is assembled and averaged to get an estimate of what the relative injury rate is on any given toxin. What you can see here is that 8 square centimeters or 2.5 square centimeters on different toxin combinations is a really small amount. So anytime we're trying to measure small amounts, we get kind of concerned, especially when you're doing it in the heat of the day. So my goal was to develop a digital damage estimation and data curation platform to try to address this issue. So what we did is we asked our graduate students to rate the same ears, corn ears, using the traditional measurement strategy with transparency grids. We digitized the same ears. We pushed them through MATLAB script, basically characterize the amount of injury from the photos collected with an iPhone, and then ask the question of how good is that estimate for the mass calculation versus the observer. What we found is when we looked at all my graduate students, this is what shocked me. My graduate students were all over the map as far as how much they deviated from what the algorithm saw. So we took the true area of injury as measured on the cell phone images and then mapped our students against it. And as you can see, based on that threshold of 8 square centimeters for an unexpected injury, some of these raters would trigger a regulatory action if that data just went on a traditional 8.5 by 11 spreadsheet or data sheet in the field. And so that's the major concern here is what could be the implications of that outcome when we're trying to use human eyes to measure something that's going to have profound impacts on farmers. So really what we think is that this is an opportunity to employ some of these digital image captures to standardize ratings across broad geographic regions. And that's really advantageous not only for the stakeholders that are farmers, but also for regulatory and industry collaborators that have a vested interest in the ongoing stewardship of these toxins. So really there's an opportunity to do something along these lines. Let's do a better job of capturing images in time, curating that data to improve decisions and let multiple stakeholders evaluate the severity of that injury. I feel that that's going to translate into better genetically engineered toxin stewardship. That's going to translate into fewer insecticide sprays. So my ask really is to start thinking about, are there partners out there that would be interested in generating improved data storage and app development framework that is secure, but it also enables multiple stakeholders to be able to see the images that are coming out of the field if resistance occurs. And really that also feeds into a broader framework, much like Chris pointed out, is we need broad or more expansive computer vision estimation tools to address a lot of these crop health issues. This is just a vignette from one aspect in the entomology field that I feel is really something that's a emerging issue for our folks, both at the academic, industry, and regulatory side. And so with that, I think I've probably burned my 5 minutes. Okay. Do we have time for a question? Perfect.
Other questions for Anders? Natalie?
So it might be obvious, but so why would this result in fewer sprays? Are these are these sprays to maintain the refuge areas or?
So the recommendation is oversprays in the event of resistance evolution. That's the recommendation of the scientific advisory panel. And the EPA is likely to probably figure out some way to institute that, but that decision hasn't been made. So if you're better at stewarding toxins, or at least characterizing the reality of injury, I feel like that's going to result in less drastic response to the perception that there's an issue. Yeah.
So to follow that path, if we're surrounded today by industry people, many of whom sell those products that
Sure.
you're talking about, not now applying, how are you going to get them engaged in your conversation?
I mean, that's a good opportunity to have a conversation with industry stakeholders, and that's part of the reason we rolled this out and published this paper, is because we feel like the academic community has had a lot of contributions to this generation of these regulatory decisions and the revision of how we're going to manage lepidopteran resistance to toxins. And certainly industry has had the opportunity to publicly comment. The goal here is just to say, here's a tool, maybe we can do it better. And I'm more than willing to discuss that with anybody who's interested, because I think it's a shared need among many folks to come up with a better way to manage this problem that continues to be an issue and will be an issue in the future.
I think we've got time for one more question. There, nothing online. Okay.
So I agree that this is a very important, and to comment just, we do want our technology to last. And I think this is how we make it durable, right? Is by managing resistance. I think it's very relevant to industry. I guess the question I have is what type of insects are you going to monitor, right? So right now you have a model that is just corn, and maybe you say, I think you mentioned Helicobacter, but of course, tolerance could be created by any insect in cotton or some of the other crops. So what's your vision moving forward, I guess? And have you engaged EPA in the discussions? Yeah.
I haven't. I mean, we just published this paper in 21, and part of the idea was, it's like, well, we can measure this. We were doing the sentinel plots anyways, and so I thought, well, maybe there's a way that we can add credibility to these estimates, so that moving forward, any stakeholder can look at those images, even if it's collected by an academic. Regulatory folks can have opportunities to look at that. I've spent most of my academic career looking at resistance issues, from potato beetles to ligas, et cetera. I think there are other opportunities, but none fit this technology quite as neatly as ear-feeding pests. So Lepidoptera would be another one that would be an obvious choice. So fall armyworm, et cetera. Insects that have different feeding ecology might not fit that. But I think this is a big enough issue right now that we need to be cognizant of. This is an opportunity to apply a really inexpensive technology through the framework of using a cloud to our advantage. Sure. Yeah. Oh, the question was, could the USDA host this platform? I think, yeah, that's definitely a possibility. Really, we took that first step to develop this algorithm as a proof of concept, and that's why we're here, I guess, for ideas and insights.
Great. So I think we need to move on. Thank you. Rings on? Yep, that's what the timer says. So while Ling is coming up, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about Ling Juan Li, because she and I have been working a lot lately on a project. She has a giant project. It is it's the definition of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. And so Ling and I have been looking at if we take that giant project and subdivide it, is there an opportunity for us to introduce some non-academic stakeholders and add them to the project. And so Ling did accept my invitation, our invitation to talk today. Ling is a professor in air quality and biosystems engineering from the Department of Biological and Ag Engineering. Her title is Next Generation Swine Production for Resiliency and Sustainability.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And on behalf of a multidisciplinary team from 6 states and 7 universities, I'm here to report to you a proposal, actually the project we're going to submit to the Sustainable Agriculture Systems, which is a next generation swine production. As we all know that climate change variability and also human, animal and human health, as well as a labor shortage, disease outbreak, environmental impacts, and socio-economic impacts are all the key factors and challenging the sustainability. So the team would like to propose to take a system approach to fundamentally to transform the swine production system to a next generation. More specifically, we would like to propose to take an approach to get the stakeholder engagement first and to get their advice, identify and prioritize the needs and the barriers and also opportunities. We plan to take their inputs into the research and the development and to develop innovative solutions, and then through the extension outreach and to bring those technologies to the industry and also to educate the next generation workforce, and moreover to educate the community, to the public. So for the RD solution 1, we propose to build an AI-driven, AI-powered control systems through the integration of the feeding, nutrition, and precision feeding through the real-time environmental monitoring, real-time animal behavior monitoring, and actually using precision livestock farming technologies, and also integrate the genomic selections, and to have these AI-powered systems to transform the animal sensor-based control system to the animal-based systems for real-time identification of the stresses and as well as the disease and for caretaker intervention. The second solutions we're talking about is developing next generation of manure, handling and also management practices for to feed the regional constraints and needs. And the third one, we propose to integrate the life cycle analysis and tech economic analysis to develop a system assessment tools to identify the impacts and trade-offs of those innovations we propose to develop, and also to identify the optimal adoption opportunity. So as for the expected outcomes, we really believe that transform the sensor-based system to the animal-based systems will enhance the resilience, welfare, and also the human capital. And we also believe that the next generation manure system management systems will help to minimize the environmental impacts. And also the tools is also very important, a system assessment tool. And not least, we really believe the training next generation workforce is very important to make the industry more sustainable. After all, we think this project will contribute to 9 out of the 17 United Nations the Sustainable Development Goals. As for the collaboration and partnership needs, and first of all, we really need the stakeholders' engagement to help us identify the challenges, to prioritize those challenges so that we can develop innovations accordingly. We also, need the stakeholders to help encourage adoption. And also, now we're talking about, just like Deborah mentioned, that we can slice those big projects into the smaller ones so that we're looking for a co-funded project that may fit your company's goals, and in the meantime can help us to collect the preliminary data for the proposal submission. With that, last but not least, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Sherrera, Mahmoud Sherrera, and Suzanne Nord, and they will give a presentation, but they are on the leadership team of this project, and we have a great team and to work on this project. Okay.
Great, thank you, Ling.
Thank you.
Are there questions for Ling? So the thing that I found fascinating about this when Ling first described it to me was that we can measure what we know that we can measure: temperature, airflow, how much food the animal is taking in. But Ling is actually describing, okay, plant scientist here, so she had to work really hard to get me to understand it. But what she's describing is that the animal is now your sensor, right? Is the animal in distress? The animal will tell you that they're in distress, and that gets fed into the system.
The control system, yeah. Thank you.
So I think there's a question.
Are you measuring the gases the animal is emitting with breathing, or gas excretion, or what types of parameters are you looking at to measure the stress of that animal?
Actually, you're talking about the gas or the waste excretion, and for the on the research at the research stage, we can do the individual animal measurement, but for the production systems, we're measuring gas production and pollutant gas from the housing. Use the house as a unit. In terms of the environmental parameters, we're talking about the ammonia, we're talking about CO2, we're talking about temperature and humidity, all those airspeed, and with the spatial and temporal variation. We're also talking about using precision livestock farming, the technology to detect their behavior in response to the stress. For example, the heat stress. They may behave different level, behave differently, or early disease, if they don't feel comfortable, they behave differently. And that's the part we would like to do the research and integrate those to the AI model for the real-time detection of those. Did I answer your question?
Thank you, Lynn. If there are no
Thank
other
you.
questions, we'll move to our next presenter, Suzanne Leonard. Suzanne is assistant professor and extension specialist in the Department of Animal Science. Suzanne's presentation is on precision livestock farming techniques for swine.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me today, Deborah. I really appreciate the invite. So even though I am in the animal science department here at NC State, I'm a little uniquely positioned in that I'm an agricultural engineer by training. And so all of my work is really involved in the realm of where that biology comes together with that technology. And so to give you a little more idea of what that looks like, one of the big things that I work on is precision livestock farming, or PLF. And the goal of this large nebulous idea is to apply all these modern data science and technologies in order to improve our livestock production systems. Specifically, PLF is working to improve the financial sustainability and profitability of all of our livestock production systems, whether they be meat, milk, or eggs. We're also looking at improving individual animal productivity. So making sure that animal can live up to its nutritional and genetic potential by improving the number of piglets weaned per sow per year, or our average daily weight gain of each of our individual animals. We're also targeting reducing the human labor inputs on our farms. We all know that there's a shortage of quality as well as quantity of data of human labor. And so if we can find ways to either automate those high repetition, low skill tasks on our farms, or if we can find data science ways in order to target our specific animals that need the help the most, then that can really help our caretakers focus their efforts where it's most needed and free up time for our humans to make more complex decisions. PLF is also interested in sustainability of our farming systems. If we can reduce our carbon footprint by reducing our inputs coming in or refining our waste streams going out, then that's really going to help our livestock producing systems overall. And this also includes earlier intervention when it comes to treating our animals with antibiotics and other health products and interventions in order to help with the sustainability overall. And lastly, but most importantly, we're looking at improving individual animal welfare. If we can focus in not just at the barn level or the pen level, but truly get down to that individual animal resolution, then we're going to be optimizing and really reaching the true potential of each of our animals. So PLF is working to accomplish all of these large and mighty goals, but for my particular area, I am really focused down on the way that our environments and animals and management strategies all interact and work together. We can optimize our systems, and we know we're doing that if we're improving our productivity and our animal welfare. And so I look at ways that we can use technology to deploy and enhance our systems. I work with hardware side, so looking at different sensors and cameras, new hardware itself, as well as new ways to deploy existing hardware. I also am involved in algorithm development and dealing with some of the backside of the data management and processing. And then not only do we want to process that data, we want to make sure that we arrive at a useful conclusion with it. And so a big, big goal for my research lab is not just collecting data, but collecting quality data and then using it to accomplish something. And then even though a lot of these techniques and the areas I focus on are mostly related to swine, a lot of these strategies are really easy to translate across all of the different species. And so I'm absolutely open to talking about you with your individual production systems. So for my lab and opportunities that I see from today, I am really interested in learning what your specific individual problems are in your production systems. Let me know what that most urgent need is and how we can find a data science or a hardware or even a software solution to help address some of those issues and challenges that you're facing today. If you're a little further along with your problems and already have a product that you're ready to be tested, here at NC State, we have these animal facilities that you can come and actually test your products in. They're essentially small scale commercial farms. And so they're a great opportunity to try out your commercial products in a more controlled environment before you're ready to send them on to the commercial farms. And then my applied research lab, I do have the opportunity to work with a lot of really great graduate as well as undergraduate students. And I would love to talk to you about opportunities of projects you may have to get a student involved and work with on that, as well as funding support or just a project talk, because these students get a lot of hands-on training in commercial systems. And again, with the hardware and the software and the animals themselves. And so they're coming out really well-rounded and are really excited to get out there on the job market. So thank you all for your time and attention today, and I look forward to connecting with you.
Thank you, Suzanne. We do have time, but I'm going to start things off. Well, first of all, I'm going to remind the folks that are online that we are watching the chat, we are watching the Q&A, so bring those questions in from externally as well. But Suzanne, I saw that image with the one chicken, right? It's a great image. And so my question is, I know you're starting with swine, but you're also talking about other animals. I wonder what the relative value is of working in a single chicken versus a single cow or a single pig. It would seem to be maybe not worth it for a single chicken or fish.
Depends on your system and what you're looking at, right?
Unless you're that chicken or fish, right?
No, you're absolutely right. It's definitely easier to start off with larger animals. A cow on its own, a single cow has a higher value than a single chicken on its own. And so it makes sense that if we're going to start with individual monitoring, you would start where you can get the most bang for your buck. But I think that if we can fine tune our technologies to get down to the individual level on the chicken, that's a success. You've made it. If you can identify the individual fish and track them as they're swimming around, I think that that's the dream. That's the highest level.
It's the dream for that one chicken or fish, right? 15 seconds of fame. Are there questions in the room or online for Suzanne?
So what are you hearing as the top one or two challenges of the industry, whichever industry that is, whether it be pigs or other livestock that you're facing through this approach?
I think by and large, the number one challenge is just labor issues. There's not enough people to come and do the jobs on farm. And even if they do come, they may not do the jobs to the quality you need them to be. And so I think that that's a universal thing. And I don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon. And so I think just finding any way that we can fully automate a job, or again, just find the animals in the herd that need the help the most. That way the caretaker doesn't have to walk through the whole barn and look at every animal. if they know that there's something going on in pin number 6, so I just need to spend 10 minutes there rather than 1 minute in 10 pins, then I think that that's going to be our first and foremost advantage.
In a pretty strong way into what feels like a really, industrial farming situation. I mean, how do you feel like that conversation will go with the public when you're sort of saying, we're just going to automate this whole thing and you don't even have to see the animal? You know what I'm saying? I'm just curious about how that conversation goes.
Yeah, you're right. So maybe I didn't represent that well. I don't think that we're going to.
I'm just thinking from the other side.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
person might hear a piece of the message, more.
Yeah, there was a study done back in 2019, and they said they found that about 35% of people acknowledge that they need technology in order to make farming sustainable, but only about 2% said they would consume food from a technologically progressive farm. And so I think there's a huge public perception issue out there when it comes to this. And so I think first and foremost, the biggest thing is that we're never going to be able to completely remove the humans. And I don't think that should be the goal. You're always going to have variability, and there's always going to be that one sow that doesn't do what she's supposed to. And so I think that keeping in mind that there will always be humans in there, right? They're still going to be in the farms, but the human can only come in and observe the animals for so many hours a day because it's not feasible. And even if you're a human, you're prone to error. You're not going to catch everything happening. But you can put up a computer system, and that camera can watch all of the animals 24 hours a day. They can pick up those finite differences. It's been shown 3 to 4 days earlier than humans can as far as disease prevention goes. And so I think that encouraging the public that this is a positive thing is showing that we can have better animal welfare by using these products.
If there are no more questions in the room or nothing online. Quiet group online today. Thank you, Suzanne. And so what I'll do is we'll ask Mahmoud Charara to join us. And presenters, be aware that I'm going to call all of you back up at the end so we can fire questions at you. So Mahmoud is assistant professor and extension specialist, also in biological and agricultural engineering. He's presenting on, holy cow, future climate impacts on nutrient cycling in North Carolina swine operations, a data analytics approach.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And we're ending the showcase with talking about manure. So I think it's a good way to end things. Again, my name is Mahmoud Charara, extension specialist, assistant professor, working primarily in manure management, or some would call it waste. I don't. I'll talk to you today about a small sub-project that is also associated with Dr. Ling's larger submission for the sustainable agricultural systems. And to our audience that are not well initiated, the project is regional to North Carolina swine production, but has opportunities to be integrated beyond. To the uninitiated, most of our swine production happens on the eastern part of the state in the coastal plains, between 24 and 2,500 individual operations, primarily relying on the lagoon to treat and store manures, and finally using irrigation to lane apply on crop and spray fields for crops and grasses. That's the primary mode of manure management on the swine operation. That approach has been received with less than enthusiastic response. And occasionally, whenever there is a hurricane coming, that becomes one of the hot topics, even if nothing happens. That's one of the largest trigger questions for a lot of the media and news outlets about the potential impacts of these hurricanes on North Carolina swine production. Some of the news coming from the swine production is actually very encouraging related to manure management, especially related to anaerobic digestion and the carbon capture for methane and injection into pipelines. However, one point that I want to point out is with the mixture of challenges and opportunities that the sector is facing, some of the environmental resistance to the current mode of manure management has actually started to put some roadblocks in the face of the capture of methane for energy and carbon capture. So this is one of the immediate points in which one environmental impact is directly colliding and competing with another in this system. And using this as a trigger we move into the climate part of North Carolina, and specifically the eastern part of the state. We're looking on the left-hand side of a map, predicting the changes in the extreme precipitation across the United States, and we're seeing the southeastern United States in particular, with what over 40% potential increase. On the right-hand side, you see the number of extreme rain events and the recurrence of extreme rainfall events as well. So all of these metrics and drivers are pointing towards a potentially more extreme and chronic rainfall that can have a severe impact on swine production, particularly reliant on open lagoons. And our research questions in this particular project is to answer those two. How will future climate impact North Carolina swine production, and what strategies that are available to increase or boost the resiliency? And how can we rank those? We are using this approach of relying on existing data sets on farms and coupling that with partnering with sensor generators that collect real-time data, high-frequency data on the levels of the lagoons in order to allow us to develop a simulation tool to predict the volumes of water or water cycling on swine operations at a higher resolution, and to allow us to integrate that with the cropping decision-making for the operators in terms of the crops and the time windows for applying these nutrients, and coupling that with the actual, and so, one of my partners in the College of Sciences, primarily with expertise in climate modeling, to pick suites of climate modeling to actually try to project, along with the cropping and soils across North Carolina, how future climate will impact this mode of manure management. And finally, looking into our toolbox of engineering of what we have, and in terms of lagoon covers, nitrification, denitrification systems, or nitrogen capture, and how these technologies can compare from an economic standpoint to the current status quo in a future climate scenario. We have a proposal, in addition to the proposal that we are planning to resubmit. We have a proposal already for internal through the university to put together the initial work required. We have some data sets that we are tracking. And a lot of the interesting first results that we're observing points to the carryover effect from an extreme rainfall event or hurricane that a lot of operations are actually having to deal with for over a year after that extreme event itself. But we're also looking into recruiting graduate students to be primarily focused on the development of this tool fully and to integrate it into a framework of future resilience for swine production. And with that, I want to thank you all and just take any questions you have on this.
Are there questions for Mahmoud? You are a quiet bunch. Natalie always has a question.
I have a question. I've been curious since I was a child, so I would say lots of things. Did you say that there's resistance to methane generation coming off of these now?
That is correct.
Wow, that's an interesting development.
It is. It's unlikely for an engineer moving towards sustainability. That seems counterintuitive to what we're driving towards.
So what's the reason that groups are opposed to converting these over to methane generators for energy reasons?
That's an interesting question. There are different reasons for different constituents. I can't capture them all, but one of the drivers are related to surface and groundwater quality and how this particular technology, advocating it or advancing it, does not improve the outcomes for water quality in general. And for a lot of these communities, they perceive that to be a no-win, or there's no advantage gained from these systems being introduced and coupled to operations.
More than 20 years ago, I worked with a gentleman from Brazil originally who lived on a farm where the dairy waste was generating methane. They used it to power things to fuel their stove to cook on and so forth. So why has it taken this long for us to embrace that technology here in an area with so much lagoon waste?
That's an excellent question. A big component here is the current increase in anaerobic digestion technologies has been really coupled with introducing that gas into pipelines after cleaning it to where it could be used further from the farms. Most of our farms are in rural communities to where if the energy is not used locally on the farm, it has to be coupled to a grid to generate electricity to be used. So in areas where that is not available, that was an untapped resource until currently where these pipelines have been extended to carry that gas into the main gas pipelines across the country. And they are traded in California and other parts of the country. Absolutely, that is correct.
Thanks, Mahmoud. Appreciate it. So this never happens. We are running early. So I am putting Todd C in the hotspot because we did get to hear from Adrian about the Plant Sciences Initiative, but we didn't get a chance to hear about the next upcoming initiative, which is our Food Animal Initiative. So with what, 3 minutes warning, Todd? Maybe 3, please.
All right, thank you, Deborah. Yeah, it may have been 3. We'll go with that. I'm happy to give you a little bit of update because I think a lot of the audience here is very aware and intimate of what's been going on with the Plant Science Initiative. If we think about a very analogous project we're doing that's a little just behind in terms of timing, is it around food animals, and it really relates, I think you go back to Dr. Lommel's introduction, and most people are aware, 68% of farm gate receipts in North Carolina come from the food animal industries. And obviously, they're very major consumers of plant products as well. And so what we're looking at is a very similar program and process that very closely models the Plant Science Initiative. We're looking at several major platforms which basically look very much similar to the Plant Science Initiative. But what we're really driving at is we've done the kind of the same process of stakeholder engagement, faculty understanding, discussions on campus, is that we're probably not going to build a $160 million building. What we see is really the big need to put this big leap forward in the systems approach we've been talking about with the faculty this afternoon, and to do things around precision animal agriculture and these future farming opportunities, which are 2 of the major thrusts. And also think about alternatives and advancements in protein and innovating protein products. And talking about communicating sciences, and Mahmoud did a very nice job of kind of describing some of the conflicting statements and messaging that we get in the animal sector. There's a lot more opposition to animal farming than plant farming. It's just not as popular. And so we're looking at those big things, and we see that the Lake Wheeler Field Lab and the facilities at the College of Veterinary Medicine is being really integral to the ability of the faculty to work together on these large overarching issues. And so we're looking to ramp up and look for an investment to enhance this infrastructure to the next level. NC State is very unique in that we have basically the full integrated process from the cropping into the feed processing, to the animal production, to the further processing of products in all of the major species we talked about, whether that be pork, poultry, dairy, beef, sheep, goats, aquaculture. We're one of the only universities in the world that actually touches all of those. And we have tremendous assets, but we do have some gaps within that. And so we're looking at things like BSL-2 facilities. And what that is to look at diseases. We've talked a lot about disease in some of these different presentations, even from a crop standpoint. And we don't have the ability at the university, and very few do, to do this on a larger animal. And so that would add to our ability to really look at some of these from a systems standpoint with our engineers and our technology. Other examples are the advances in protein innovation, more work on the 5G and the infrastructure out there to take these technologies to the next level and really do a better job of community engagement. We're just about 3 miles from these farms. We talk about we see the headlines that Mahmoud shared about challenges with swine farming, but we run a commercial swine farm 3 miles from here, across the road from a church, adjacent to a golf course, and don't have complaints. So there's opportunities to put this into the communications realm, work with our students, have them understand how we communicate and talk about these things, and try to address those levels as well. And so that's kind of in the, I think, the time to allot it to me, Deborah, is a brief overview of the Food Animal Initiative. And we're really kind of, like I say, trying to mirror some of those same successes from a plant science standpoint. But we see that type of infrastructure, those buildings, those farms, as being the real need and challenge to keep this university at the forefront of those opportunities. So thank you for the opportunity. Always glad to talk.
Could do it. Thanks, Todd. All right. So we have reached the end. Will you join me, please, in thanking our moderator, our panelists, our presenters one more time for their input. I want to thank the people that were also online. We had some from as far away as Europe and India. So the showcases are now have a global reach. We're going to close the formal program. We're going to close the Zoom link. The people that are online, next time come and join us because we do have a lovely networking reception set up. And oh, I know. Please plan to join us because our next Emerging Research Showcase will be on April 6th, presumably back in this room. There will be a specialty crop innovation program showcase on February 9 at the Arboretum, we think. Tiago and Carlos Iglesias are organizing that one. So mark your calendars, February 9 in the afternoon and April 6 in the afternoon. With that, I think we'll adjourn the formal program. Thank you all for being here.